Hi, important class. We're going to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a really nasty beast that I've dealt with my entire life, and I'm going to tell you exactly what it is, what happens to you when you experiencing it, and what you can do to deal with it. Now, let me start by saying very clearly that I am not a doctor and I do not give medical advice. But I felt that it was important to tell you that I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder at the age of 12 years old, having personally been through every type of treatment for PTSD available. So I'm going to tell you what worked for me, but more importantly, the real value is in telling you what did not work for me, because that is the most important information. Before we get there, however, I need to give you a trigger warning because the story I'm about to tell you is really graphic and it involves a murder. So if this is triggering for you, you might want to proceed with caution. So that having been said, what exactly is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD as it's sometimes referred to? It's a mental health condition that can be triggered by a terrifying event. Now, on the outside, that sounds really simple, right? Well, it's not. It's a very complicated disorder and there's a lot to it. Post-traumatic stress symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, and uncontrollable thoughts that will loop over and over in your head about the actual event. And that can be really distressing. If you're experiencing any of these symptoms, it's important for you to seek professional help because this is not something that's going to get better on its own, and it's not something you can do anything about by yourself. When I was 8 years old, I was the unfortunate witness to the aftermath of a murder scene. And at the time that this happened, my parents were in the middle of a very contentious divorce, which in and of itself can cause post-traumatic stress disorder in certain cases. Now, I was living with my father at the time, and he had decided to take me and my two best friends who lived in the same complex across the street to a local amusement park for the day. You know, like a good dad would. And I had a great father. When we returned home, we saw my friend's parents in the front yard and they were screaming and yelling at each other. And so right away we knew there was trouble. And it was a crazy scene. And my father instinctively figured out that this wasn't the right time to return my friends back to their home because their mom and dad were being crazy out in the front yard. So he suggested that we all go back to my apartment and order some pizza, which is exactly what we did. Now, everything up to this point seems totally normal. But about midnight that evening, there was this loud knock at the door. Boom, boom, boom. I mean, it was really loud and forceful. And it was my friend's mother, and she was requesting that the boys come back home. And so at the time, we felt a little uneasy about it, but my dad talked to her and, you know, there's nothing he can do. He can't hold them hostage. So he let them go. Then, my father and I decided to go to bed. And about 3 or 4 in the morning, we heard all of this commotion outside the apartment. And it was a lot. It was fire trucks, ambulances, rescue, police. Our apartment faced the back of the complex, so we really couldn't see what was happening in the front. But we could, however, see over top of the tree line, we could see the flashing lights from all the rescue vehicles that were in the front of our complex. So we knew that something major had happened. And living in an apartment complex, we naturally thought that the building was on fire. So my dad rushed me to get myself taken care of, and I only was in t-shirt and underwear. And so we got dressed and out the door we went. And before you knew it, we were standing in the front yard of the complex. And when we get to the front of the building, we learned that it wasn't our building. In fact, there was no fire at all. It was the building that my friends lived in, the two boys, and it was across the street, directly across the complex from my apartment. In fact, our windows almost faced each other in a way. And my dad started a conversation with one of the police officers or firemen, and I seized that opportunity to go investigate. And honestly, I wish that I never did. I ran around the back and I took the staircase which led directly up to my friend's apartment, and I found the door wide open. Now, the apartment was filled with people. There were all kinds of rescue and first responders inside the apartment. Everybody was busy doing their thing. And suddenly, I looked down and found myself standing in a large pool of blood. It was a big pool of blood, the kind of pool of blood that you know no one can survive. And then I saw her. It was my babysitter. It was the mother of the two boys, my two best friends, the young boys that were 8 and 10 years old. And it was hard for me to understand what I was really seeing, because she had been violently murdered. And when I looked down, I saw her head and part of one shoulder laying to my left, and then I saw the rest of her just over to the right. And she'd just been left there for dead, and she'd been cut in half, kind of. And I saw that as an 8-year-old boy. And what seemed to my little 8-year-old mind like 5 or 10 minutes, most likely was about 3 seconds before someone grabbed me and ran out the door. And at the base of the staircase, I see my father, and he wasn't happy. I had been a bad boy and had gone up into this apartment, and he grabbed me and suddenly noticed my bloody shoes. And so he took them off, and they fell to the ground, and we left them there. I never saw those shoes again. And he took me home, and as we left, I could see the police bringing my two friends out of the apartment. And they were both wrapped up individually in these sheets so that they wouldn't see the literal nightmare that was inside of their living room. In fact, the entire living room was covered in blood spatter. Something that if they saw would traumatize them for life. This was their mother. They were lucky at the time of the event that they were in their room asleep and they didn't hear anything. However, I wasn't so lucky. Because of me being the Dennis the Menace, mischievous little boy that I was, I did see it. And you know what? I remember the smell to this very day. There is a peculiar odor that I remember from that moment that's just seared into my brain. I was just 8 years old at the time. And no one should ever have to witness such a horrific event. But as life would have it, I did. And their father brutally murdered their mother, hacked her into pieces. Now the good news is he was caught, and after the event he went to a local bar and began talking to the bartender in his already inebriated state. And he told the bartender exactly what happened, and the police were called. So in a short time he was apprehended. But that doesn't change what happened to me. Anytime someone experiences a traumatic event like these, our brains can do some really strange things to help that person survive, and mine certainly did. When someone experiences a traumatic event, their brain goes into survival mode, so to speak, and it begins to compartmentalize things so that it can handle it. This means the brain starts to process information differently to help that person just survive, just get through it, because what they've seen is going to change their DNA. One of the ways the brain does this is by releasing chemicals that help to numb the person's emotions in that moment, which can make your recall of the events very hazy and foggy. And this can lead to a person feeling disconnected from their emotions, and they make it difficult to process what actually took place. The brain is an amazing thing when it's dealing with trauma like this, and my brain did exactly this. But it also compartmentalized the events and locked it away so that it would come back to haunt me another day. Now let's all take a deep breath and just let that go, because that's a lot to take in. But I lived through that. I was 8 years old when that happened. And I know it's a lot to handle. Believe me, it was a lot for me to handle. I compartmentalized that, put it away, and it never bothered me again. I never really even thought about it until years later. As I've said many times before, if you don't deal with your issues will deal with you. War veterans commonly experience this type of post-traumatic stress disorder when they come home from the war. But PTSD doesn't discriminate. It does not matter whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whether you're a child, whether you're rich or poor or black or white, doesn't matter. It affects humans equally. And PTSD will affect anyone who has experienced a really serious traumatic event. And one of the most important points that I want to make tonight is that not all scars are visible. That is a really important point, because not all injuries can be seen. Sometimes the most traumatic injuries are up here or in here. And some of these traumatic events that people go through, looking at them on the outside, you would never know what they experienced. And post-traumatic stress disorder just doesn't go away. It's not something that you can just fix on your own. It's something that a person will have to deal with for the rest of their lives. I think about this murder all the time. I have flashbacks, even to this day. But there is help out there, and people can get better. And that's my message. So what does post-traumatic stress disorder feel like? Let's talk about that for a second. Some of the symptoms when you have or are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder include things like I mentioned: flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, severe depression, uncontrollable thoughts about the event itself, difficulty adjusting and coping with real life, feeling disconnected from your emotions, trouble processing what has happened to you, feeling like you are different from everyone else, isolating yourself from the entire world because they'll never understand. And you might be asking yourself right about now, what qualifies as a traumatic event? That is a really great question. It's a question no one ever asks, because a traumatic event can be different for everybody. It could be something as simple as a car accident. It could be something as simple as your dog dying. But it could also be combat and war, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, physical abuse, whether that's sexual abuse or physical abuse. Both are in my past as well. So these are just a few examples, but I think that you kind of get the gist of what I'm talking about. But post-traumatic stress disorder can be caused by any event that is perceived as life-threatening or could cause serious injury. But sometimes I like to think of post-traumatic stress disorder as something that triggers you. Symptoms can start within the first 3 months after the traumatic event, but sometimes symptoms may not start for years after the event, which was what happened in my case. My brain locked it away and I never dealt with it again until much, much later. Because something else that's important to understand is not everyone who experiences a traumatic event will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. There are many different types of events that can lead to someone developing post-traumatic stress disorder. And so PTSD symptoms are generally divided into 4 basic categories. So you have intrusive thoughts, and those can be horrendous. You have avoidance is another one, which I did quite successfully. Negative changes in thinking and mood is the third one. And the fourth one are changes in physical and emotional reactions to the world around you. So you suddenly might start snapping at people, for example. Now I want to do a deep dive into each one of these categories and just highlight them a little bit more, because I think it's important for you to understand exactly which ones might apply to you and your unique situation. So let's talk about it. First, I want to talk about intrusive thoughts. Now, this is something that I have struggled with my entire life. These are unwanted memories of the trauma that invades your head at any time. And it does it at its own time when it wants to. So you're not in control of it. And you might feel like you're reliving the event, or it's happening to you all over again every single time you get triggered by those thoughts. For example, to this day, I can't watch gory or bloody movies. Any kind of an action film or a horror film that has blood and guts in it, I just can't do it. For me, I wake up in cold sweats and start having nightmares about the event. And so I have to be careful with that. You know, and then next there's avoidance. You isolate yourself. You don't want to be around people because they're not going to understand what's going on inside. You may try to avoid things that remind you of that trauma. And this isolates you. You know, it's kind of like how I avoid horror films, for example. But it can also be people, places, and things that you avoid. This may include conversations, activities, or anything else that brings back or might bring back memories of the event. You can avoid things because you're afraid that it might trigger you. And then next we have negative changes in mood and thinking. And when you have these types of changes that are happening inside of you, post-traumatic stress disorder can change how you think about yourself, and it can also change how you think about others. So you may have negative feelings such as shame or guilt, and your self-esteem may be lowered quite a bit as a result of this constant barrage of negative thoughts going through your head telling you how horrible you are. It's common for people with post-traumatic stress disorder to lose interest in things that they once enjoyed doing. And that was certainly true with me too. It can also make it hard for you to concentrate or even sleep. And that was a big one for me. Every time I lay down and closed my eyes, I would see a particular scene. And sleeping and concentration, that can go on for years, and it can terrorize you. It can be really hard to deal with. Next, we have changes in physical and emotional reactions. Like I was talking about snapping at people. That's what I did. You may feel on edge, and you might startle easily, or you're having trouble controlling your anger. All of these applied to me. And it was really difficult to get through this. You might also have some physical symptoms such as headaches, chest pains, heart palpitations, sweating, uncontrollable sweating, hands, bottom of your feet, under your arms. Post-traumatic stress disorder can make you feel detached from others, can make you feel detached from the world around you or even reality. And in severe cases, you might even lose touch with reality. And this is called disassociation. And I experienced that as well. It's a horrible thing to go through. Another question that I get a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder is, what are the risk factors? People want to know how risky this is. Well, a lot of people who commit suicide are struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, and people of all ages can have this. So it's a real problem in terms of mental health in our country, in the world. However, some factors make it more likely that you'll develop PTSD after a traumatic event. And some of those factors include experiencing intense or a long-lasting trauma. In other words, physical abuse that might go on for an extended period of time. Or having experienced other trauma earlier in life, such as childhood trauma, or any kind of abuse that happened when you were a child, such as in my case. Having a job that increases your risk of being exposed to traumatic events, such as being in the military, being a first responder, being a policeman, even an airline pilot, or anything of that nature. And also having other mental health problems such as anxiety, stress, and depression. When you have that on top of PTSD, you can really screw yourself up. So having problems like that will lead to things like drug and alcohol abuse, because people can't take it. They can't take it. They need relief. And so if you don't have that good support system around you, those family and friends that are there to help you, you're going to go down a really dark, dangerous road. Having blood relatives with mental health problems can also trigger you. And so let's talk about some of the treatment options. Now, as I said at the beginning of this, I have been through every single method of treatment there is out there. And there are many types of treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. And here's what works best from someone who's been through all of them. And then at the end, I'm going to tell you about a new one that really made the difference in my life. You've got to find the treatment that works right for you. That's my best advice. Some people with post-traumatic stress disorder need medication to help with their symptoms, while others only need therapy. Now, I did both. I used medication at times, and then other times it was just therapy. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to treating this kind of a disorder, so it's important that you work with your doctor or your therapist to figure out what's really going to work best for you and the situation that you're individually dealing with. Some common post-traumatic stress disorder treatments include things like CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is a type of therapy that can help you change the way you think about your trauma and can help you learn to cope with your symptoms. So it teaches you skills and mechanisms for dealing with the issues. Now, this worked for me for the most part. There's still some gaps in that needed to be figured out. How well it works truly depends on the quality of the therapist sitting in front of you. And that's a slippery slope. For more on choosing the best therapist for your unique situation, check out my podcast episode on exactly how to find the right therapist for you. My podcast is called What the Tigers Taught Me. You can find it anywhere on Apple iTunes, Spotify. Go find it. Then there's exposure therapy, and this type of therapy helps you by exposing you to the triggers in a controlled environment. Now, this can be really scary. I went through this as well, but it does work. And this will help you to learn to control your reactions and to start feel less afraid. That's the real benefit in that type of therapy. Now, this therapy I consider very effective for me. It helped me to overcome the fear of being triggered that I had. And it's very difficult to go through emotionally, but it's well worth the end result. You're going to experience some real deep emotions. They're going to come out, and you're going to have to deal with that. Now, the next kind of therapy I went through is called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR. It's a mouthful, I know. But let me tell you that this one was one of my favorites. EMDR is a type of therapy that uses eye movements and other forms of sensory to help you process the trauma. And this therapy was one of my favorites because it really gave me instant feedback and allowed me to learn how to adjust in my mind. It seems kind of silly at first, but if you stick with it, I promise you it's going to really work for you. Because you're sitting there and in your therapy session with these little vibrating machines in your hand, and your therapist begins asking you questions, and you're feeling these things vibrate in your hand. It's really interesting if you'll open your mind to it, and there's a lot of research behind it that suggests this really, really works. Again, this will totally depend on the quality of therapist that you're working with, as most therapists I have found are useless clock watchers who are only there to collect a check. Most therapists are useless. It's finding the good ones, that's the key. Unfortunately, all therapists are not created equal with the same level of care and compassion. And so I have a whole episode on my podcast about how to find the right therapist. You should check it out. And then there's medication. And there's all kinds of different types of medication that can be used to treat post-traumatic stress disorder. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and all kinds of sleep aids and other crap that your doctor would just love to write you a prescription for. But you should work with your doctor to figure out if medication is right for you. You guys know how I feel about this. I'm skills first, pills as a last resort. So it works, but I'm personally not a big fan of the medication route. Try everything else first, except for this. The medication that I was prescribed turned me into a drug-induced zombie that I was in this haze and I just couldn't take it. And it really, really affected me. But then, many years later, I had a treatment that worked far better than anything else I've ever tried in the past. Now, this therapy really excites me because I think it has a tremendous future to help lots of people. It's a little controversial among the more conservative, closed-minded people out there, but it is a new therapy, an experimental therapy using ketamine. Now, some of you my age might know it by Special K, which is its street name. Yes, it's the same street drug. However, it's microdosed under controlled medical conditions. And I can tell you that this is what worked the best for me. Without question, the effect was immediate. Ketamine has been found to relieve the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, in some cases within hours, rather than usually weeks that it takes other medications to work. And so how does ketamine work for people with post-traumatic stress disorder? Well, here's the simplest way to understand it. The simple answer is that ketamine works by increasing levels of GABA and inhibiting glutamate. In other words, it helps to restore the balance between neurotransmitters and can help reduce the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. That's all you really need to understand. However, ketamine treatments are not available in all states currently, and at the time that I'm filming this, it is not covered by insurance either. Now, I will tell you that ketamine therapy is what I believe eventually cured my post-traumatic stress disorder. And It worked for me incredibly well, so I'm a big proponent of it. Far better than all of the other treatments that I had combined. If you can afford to do so, go straight to the ketamine. I'll be honest with you and tell you it's not cheap. And I'm going to tell you what my treatments cost, and it's outrageous. My sessions cost roughly about $350 each, and it required about 8 sessions over a period of time. The worst part is that it's not currently covered by insurance, as I said. So you have to pay for this out of your own pocket. So if this is an option for you, think about ketamine, because it produced the best results for me by far. And that having been said, I will tell you that this therapy is highly recommended today. My therapist is the one that actually introduced it to me. I'd never even heard of it. And it's an IV infused treatment. You can also take a pill, and it really is kind of relaxing. You're just there. I'm working on my laptop listening to music, and it's flowing into me, so it's not that big of a deal. You'll notice the difference in your moods and thoughts and feelings after just 2 or 3 treatments. Really, after the first treatment, I began to feel differently, but I noticed a marked significance after like the second. And it also helped me tremendously with my depression. I think that there's a lot to be said for it there as well. And this was a completely unexpected effect for me. No one talked to me about this or told me that could be a part of this. But post-traumatic stress disorder is a condition that can be treated, and there are many options available to you out there. So that's why I do this. I want to get this information out there. And if you think that you might have post-traumatic stress disorder, it's important to talk to your mental health professional or your doctor and let them guide you on a treatment plan that is best for you. But I want to arm you with the information of what I've learned, because you can start to feel better and you can go on with your life, and these things can make a difference. They can get you back to where you used to be. Think about it. Wouldn't you like to feel normal again? Maybe you've never felt normal in your whole life, which was the case for me. And it took me a while to figure out what my new normal was. Now, the National Institute for Mental Health has many resources on their website, including the causes, treatments, and all kinds of other information that you might need. And also, the Veteran Affairs website also has a wealth of information on post-traumatic stress disorder, including support groups and treatment options for veterans, because veterans come home from war messed up in their head because of what they see and experience. I'm so anti-war, I can't even tell you. There are many hotlines out there that you can contact as well if you're struggling with this. And I want to give those to you. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-TALK, T-A-L-K. So that number, if you want to write it down, is 800-273-8225. That's the number. And there's also a post-traumatic stress disorder crisis line. And that number is 1-866-787-3887. So those numbers I'll publish here. And if I can recover from having witnessed the horrific aftermath and the brutal murder of someone that I knew and loved, I promise you that you can heal from your post-traumatic stress disorder as well. Don't let it define you. Don't let it define your experience of life. There is hope for recovery, and you're not alone. Millions of people are dealing with this every single day. If this information has resonated with you in any way, or if you need someone to talk to, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm a post-traumatic stress disorder survivor, and I'm here to help you in any way that I can. I can guide you in the right direction. If you're looking for someone to help guide you through the entire process, please set up a free 15-minute consultation call with me, and I'll give you some great advice that will save you emotional pain, time, and even a little bit of money. Because I've been there. I've gone through all of it. I know what the process is, and I know what works, and I know what doesn't. Remember that you are not alone. And there is hope for recovery. You can get better, no matter what you've experienced, no matter what you've been through. I've coached incest victims. I've coached people who've been through all kinds of sexual abuse. I've coached all kinds of people with all kinds of traumatic things, even war vets. I have a lot of war vets that I deal with. And I've personally experienced all the treatments that are out there. So with the right treatment, you can start to feel better and live a more happy life. Hey, thanks so much for watching. And remember to take care of yourself and each other. And as always, I'll see you next week.